now we have our book corner, and in our book corner is author Pamela Glasner, who is the author of Finding Emmaus.
Yes.
Now, this is really an historical fantasy.
It's really historical fiction.
A historical fiction. This is the book Finding Emmaus. Now, from a theological point of view, when I heard this, I thought of Luke 24, which is after the resurrection. Some of Jesus' disciples are walking on the road to Emmaus, and they come across Jesus.
Yes.
Now, why did you name this book Finding Emmaus?
Well, without getting into too much theology, my interpretation of the story of the road to Emmaus is that they had loved Jesus, hung on his every word, and I mean, you know the story, and they saw this who they expected to be their savior, murdered in a horrific fashion, and when everything became absolutely unendurable, they wanted to be where they could believe that that humanity and love and sanity still existed, so they were going home. The actual town of Emmaus, scholars, nobody's ever been able to find so much as a teaspoon to actually confirm its existence. So my interpretation is that it's really more about what goes on in your heart and your mind rather than about being geography. So to me it's like seeking shelter from the storm, and that's what my principal characters are doing. They're seeking shelter for themselves and for the people that they're trying to save in the story.
Now, you focus on something called empathics.
Empaths.
Empaths. And empaths are people who actually feel other people's pain, right?
Not just pain, any emotion.
Any emotion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And is this an actual category of psychology and
that
psychiatry?
depends on where you fall in the time continuum here. I mean, there is a huge population that does believe in it. I mean, there are some very, very sensitive people. You know, you've heard of twins knowing about what's happening with their other twin, or with a mom who says, oh my gosh, my child needs me, without actually knowing about it, that kind of thing. So an empath is really that multiplied by. And I just thought that it would be actually, because this book is very much about the intolerance of society and how those who are either mentally ill or who are different are treated so poorly, are ostracized and victimized. That's really what this story is about.
What's interesting, though, is that you actually chart this over, what,
350 years.
350 years, and you have the main character introducing the story, and he's 98 years old, but he's been dead for 250 years.
Yes.
This is incredible. Well, it's incredible if it actually happened.
Thank you. Well, I really thought that I wanted to do I wanted the Lodestar. It's called the Lodestar series. The Lodestar actually means guiding principle.
Okay.
The Lodestar is, and I'm not giving anything away, the Lodestar is the book that Frank, the 1600s character, creates. And this is supposed to be sort of a central body of information, a central authoritative body, to teach people how to live with this extraordinary gift and pass it on and teach others so that they are not declared mentally ill, so that they don't suffer the fate that he did. Because the mentally ill, as I said, back then they were tortured, I mean physically tortured.
Right.
Now we medicate them and we're more sophisticated in the way that we torture them.
But one of the things you do in the book, and I've not read the entire book, but read many of the articles about it, that you really take on the pharmaceutical companies. I mean, the industry itself, that they're more apt to medicate people, more apt to label people because it's beneficial to them.
Yes.
In a word, I guess that's okay.
Yes.
I mean, do you worry that they would come after you, saying, you know, this is really very wrong. You know, we're here to help people. We provide medications and much needed medications.
And they absolutely do provide medications and much needed medications, and they are also a business. And they spend billions of dollars a year. They've spent they've spent over $1 billion in Washington just affecting legislation. They've had their fingers in 1,600 pieces of legislation just for their benefit. And there's documentation in the you know what the CDC is. There's documentation all over the place that shows that they are antidepressant, psychotropic drugs are approximately 70% ineffective. And yet, I mean, if you opened up cases of soda and 70% of the time you didn't like the taste, how long do you think it would stay on the shelf? And yet they have a product that fails 70% of the time, and yet in a 4-year period went from a $12 billion industry in the United States to a $70 billion industry with a product that fails.
Well, great marketing. And
excellent, well, because they create the market. There's a wonderful book out by a gentleman by the name of Christopher Lane called Shyness, how normal human behavior became a sickness.
Yes.
They are creating illnesses, ADD, ADHD, those were created